April 1945. Schroenhausen, Bavaria. A young German woman, her heart pounding with fear, looked cautiously through a small opening in the heavy curtains, trying to catch a glimpse of the American tanks rolling ominously down the cobblestone street. For 2 long years, Nazi news and radio broadcasts had relentlessly drilled into Margaret Mueller's mind what to expect. The enemy was coming, and they were portrayed as ruthless invaders. Nazi papers and broadcasts had shared terrifying, vivid stories about what American soldiers would do to German women, painting them as barbaric threats. The stories were clear, detailed, and deliberately frightening, crafted to instill both paralyzing fear and a grim determination in women's hearts. That cold, anxious morning, Margaret and 7 other young women from her quiet street were summoned and told to report to the damp, dimly lit town hall basement. The local leader, a stern figure of authority, explained in a grave tone that they would serve as comfort women for the American soldiers, a desperate sacrifice meant to shield other German women from harm. That spring, as the war's end loomed, Nazi leaders hastily established 211 similar places across southern Germany, converting town halls, schools, and even private homes into makeshift facilities where occupying soldiers could be directed. According to old, tattered Nazi documents later recovered, approximately 2,800 German women, aged between 17 and 30, were forcibly conscripted into this harrowing program. A chilling Nazi order, issued on March 12, 1945, declared these places were necessary to protect the majority of German women from the invaders. The order's manipulative language was designed to deceive young women, convincing them that American soldiers were savage, wild animals who would storm through German towns, pillaging and taking whatever they desired by force. One widely circulated Nazi propaganda paper boldly claimed that American soldiers had been promised German women as a reward for their invasion. Another, even more insidious publication alleged that American military units included specialized battalions filled with men released from prisons and mental hospitals, men who were barely human. These lies were disturbingly effective because they mirrored the Germans' own grim practices. The German army had established over 500 military brothels across occupied Europe from 1940 to 1944, cruelly forcing an estimated 34,000 women from conquered territories to serve their soldiers. German leaders, projecting their own brutal system onto their enemies, assumed the Americans would act the same way. Margaret and thousands of others like her faced their grim fate with a heavy mixture of terror and resigned acceptance. Some, overwhelmed by dread, contemplated ending their lives. In the nearby city of Regensburg, records later revealed that 27 women died by suicide in April 1945, unable to face what they believed was inevitable. Others quietly secured poison, planning to use it if the anticipated assaults became unbearable. They couldn't possibly imagine what would actually unfold in the days to come. Nazi propaganda had so thoroughly warped their expectations that it was impossible to conceive that American soldiers might behave differently. That tense April evening, as Margaret carefully packed a small bag with a few clothes, basic toiletries, and a hidden cyanide capsule secretly provided by a compassionate pharmacist, she had no idea that the greatest shock awaiting her would not be the violence she feared, but an unexpected display of American kindness and restraint. The soldiers advancing toward her town carried not only rifles and supplies but also a strict set of behavioral rules that would systematically dismantle the Nazi lies. The final deception of the Third Reich was on the verge of collapsing under the weight of an astonishing and unforeseen respect. December 1944, Fort Benning, Georgia. An American sergeant, his voice steady and commanding, stood before rows of soldiers diligently training for their mission in Germany. In his hand, he clutched a small, 32-page booklet titled The Pocket Guide to Germany, a critical document distributed to 1.6 million men preparing for occupation duties. "German women are not your prize," he declared firmly, tapping the section of the guide that outlined strict rules for interacting with civilians. Being too friendly with Germans is strictly forbidden under General Eisenhower's orders. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, explaining that breaking these rules could lead to severe consequences: loss of rank, forfeiture of pay, or even imprisonment for up to a year. As the Allied forces geared up for their final push into Germany, the American military implemented an unprecedented and meticulous plan for how soldiers should conduct themselves in the occupied territory. On September 22, 1944, General Eisenhower's Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force issued Directive JCS1067, a comprehensive order explicitly prohibiting any friendly or personal contact with German civilians or officials. Unlike previous American military occupations in history, this one included specific protections for German women from the very outset, with detailed non-fraternization rules designed to maintain a clear separation between the occupiers and the occupied population. Soldiers underwent intensive 12-hour training modules focused specifically on how to interact appropriately with civilians. Military police units received an additional 36 hours of specialized training in gender-sensitive operations to ensure they could handle delicate situations with care. All command-level officers were required to complete mandatory courses on occupation ethics at a dedicated military government school established at the University of Virginia, where instructors emphasized that America's moral credibility hinged on disciplined and respectful conduct. The Pocket Guide to Germany was unambiguous in its message. American soldiers must demonstrate that democracy respects women, unlike the Nazi regime. Your actions represent not just the military, but the core values of America. The guide explicitly prohibited entering private German homes without official authorization, requiring female civilians to perform personal services, or engaging in non-essential conversations with German women. Every soldier received this guide, was required to sign an acknowledgement of understanding its contents, and faced routine inspections to ensure they carried it at all times. To enforce these rules, each company appointed a dedicated non-fraternization enforcement officer, and military police squads conducted regular patrols specifically monitoring interactions between soldiers and civilians. Military records later revealed that during pre-deployment training, 217 soldiers were disciplined for violating these rules between January and March 1945 alone, a deliberate effort to underscore the gravity of the policy. On February 7, 1945, General Patton addressed his Third Army officers with characteristic bluntness, stating, "How we treat German women will determine whether they see democracy as morally superior to Nazism. Stay professional or you'll answer to me personally." This approach was not merely about maintaining military discipline but also about executing a psychological strategy to disprove Nazi propaganda claims of American barbarity. The preparation of the 40,000 African American troops assigned to occupation duties carried particular significance, as their commanders emphasized that their exemplary conduct would challenge both Nazi racial ideologies and domestic stereotypes back in the United States. Their training included specific discussions on how their respectful treatment of German women could undermine multiple forms of prejudice simultaneously. As American forces crossed the Rhine River in March 1945, they brought with them not only weapons and logistical supplies, but also a comprehensive behavioral framework that stood in stark contrast to the expectations awaiting them in German towns. The collapse of this one central lie, that American soldiers were predatory animals, created a cascade effect, leading women to doubt the broader Nazi framework. Trust in the occupation forces developed through predictable patterns of respectful interaction. Military government surveys tracked a remarkable shift in civilian attitudes. Female approval of American forces rose from a mere 14% in May 1945 to an impressive 72% by December. The 37,500 German women employed by occupation authorities by late 1945, in roles such as clerical work, translation, and administration, became informal ambassadors within their communities, counteracting lingering propaganda through their first-hand testimonials. By November 1945, the Information Control Division had established 87 America houses across the occupation zone, cultural centers offering German women their first unfiltered access to American literature, music, and democratic political thought. Attendance records reveal that women constituted 64% of visitors to these facilities in their first year of operation. Survey data further indicated that women with regular professional contact with Americans showed an 81% approval rate for democratic governance by spring 1946, compared to just 43% among women without such contact. Former comfort women exhibited an even more dramatic transformation, with 93% expressing support for democratic systems in post-occupation interviews, suggesting that the stark contrast between their expectations and reality created an especially powerful reassessment. As the occupation progressed, non-fraternization policies gradually relaxed. In July 1945, social conversation in public places was permitted. In October, interactions with German children were allowed, and by December, limited social contact with adults in public venues was authorized. Remarkably, military government records show that as these restrictions eased, reported violations actually decreased, indicating that the initial rigid structure had successfully established lasting behavioral norms among soldiers. Despite the prohibitions, romantic relationships inevitably developed. Between 1945 and 1949, approximately 14,175 German women married American personnel, with the first such union officially recorded in August 1946 after policy changes permitted fraternization. These marriages required extensive background screening and commanding officer approval, often involving a 6-month waiting period. The estimated 94,000 children born from American-German relationships between 1945 and 1955 became visible symbols of transformed relations. Helga Brandt, who had hidden in her cellar for 3 days when American troops arrived in Munich, wrote to her sister in October 1945, "Last week, I attended a chamber music concert organized by the Americans. Halfway through, I realized I was sitting unaccompanied in a room full of foreign soldiers, yet I felt completely safe. That simple moment made me understand how thoroughly we were deceived, not just about these men, but about everything the Nazis taught us." July 1955, Schroenhausen, Bavaria. Margaret Mueller, now Margaret Wilson, gently pushed her daughter's stroller through the bustling town square, the same place where, a decade earlier, she had stood trembling with fear, awaiting the arrival of American troops. Her personal transformation mirrored a broader societal shift across West Germany, where women's experiences during the American occupation had profound and lasting impacts on political attitudes and gender relations. Longitudinal studies conducted by the Institute for Demoskopie Allensbach meticulously tracked this evolution, finding that women who had direct contact with American forces between 1945 and 1949 demonstrated 37% higher rates of democratic participation, such as voting and civic engagement, compared to demographically matched counterparts without such interactions. Dr. Elizabeth Koenig's landmark 1960 study, Expectation and Reality, German Women's Political Development, documented that among 173 women interviewed who had been designated as comfort personnel, an extraordinary 89% became actively involved in democratic politics, compared to just 23% of the general female population. Their direct experience with the stark contrast between Nazi propaganda and American conduct triggered a permanent shift in their worldview. One woman explained, "Once I discovered they had lied about this fundamental threat, I began questioning everything else I had been taught." This transformation extended across generations. The daughters of women who experienced the American occupation exhibited measurably different attitudes. University of Munich research in the 1970s found they were 42% more likely to pursue higher education, 56% more likely to support gender equality initiatives, and demonstrated significantly higher rates of democratic participation than their peers. The lived experiences of their mothers created an intergenerational transmission of democratic values far more effective than any formal education program. This profound shift was reflected in post-war German culture, with literature, film, and art capturing the societal reassessment. Louise Rinser's 1953 novel Distant Target portrayed the psychological journey of a woman designated as a comfort girl who discovers unexpected dignity during the American occupation. Similarly, the 1959 film Die Bruckner Hoffnung, Bridge of Hope, explored these themes, becoming one of post-war Germany's first major international cinematic successes. Academic research continued to document this phenomenon. Professor Maria Hearn's comprehensive 2001 study, GIs and Fräuleins, analyzed over 12,000 personal accounts, military records, and survey data to quantify the occupation's impact on women's political development. Her research concluded that the contradiction between Nazi predictions of American brutality and the reality of American respect became a central catalyst for Germany's democratization, particularly for women who had been most thoroughly indoctrinated by the regime's final propaganda efforts. Statistical comparisons highlight the scale of this contrast. In the American occupation zone between 1945 and 1949, reported sexual assault cases totaled 1,336, with a 95% prosecution rate. 128,400 women were employed by occupation authorities. 14,175 German-American marriages were recorded, and female democratic political participation surged from 21% to 67%. In contrast, the Soviet occupation zone during the same period saw an estimated 240,000 sexual assaults, only 18,700 women in administrative roles, no authorized Soviet German marriages, and strictly controlled political participation. The modern legacy of this period persists in contemporary German-American relations, with polling data consistently showing stronger support for transatlantic partnerships among women whose mothers experienced the American occupation. The 2018 Transatlantic Trends Survey found that 76% of respondents from this demographic supported NATO and broader American alliances, compared to 54% of the general population. Margaret herself embodied this transformation. The young woman who had hidden a cyanide capsule in April 1945 became a community liaison for the Marshall Plan in 1948, married an American administrator in 1950, and later served on the Schroenhausen City Council after returning from America. Her journey, from paralyzing fear to civic leadership, mirrored the path of thousands of German women whose experiences with unexpected American respect became a foundational cornerstone of post-war democracy. The story of these women, prepared for violation but met with dignity, reveals the counterintuitive mechanisms of historical change. The American occupiers, through the simple act of treating German women with ordinary respect, unknowingly planted the seeds of a democratic transformation that would flourish across generations, helping to establish Europe's most stable democracy from the ashes of its most horrific dictatorship. April 15, 1945. Bad Tölz, Bavaria. The heavy boots of an American officer echoed sharply on the polished wooden floor as he conducted a meticulous housing requisition in the Hoffman family home. Clipboard in hand, he carefully documented available spaces while maintaining a formal 3-meter distance from Mrs. Hoffman and her 2 daughters, who watched him warily. "This room will remain private," he noted decisively on his form, designating the daughter's bedroom as strictly off-limits to military personnel. "American soldiers will use a separate entrance and bathroom facilities," he added, ensuring clear boundaries. His translator, speaking in halting but clear German, conveyed these instructions, explaining that bathroom access would be carefully scheduled, with specific times reserved exclusively for the family's privacy. Across occupied Germany, these initial encounters between American soldiers and German women followed a strikingly consistent pattern of formality and restraint. Housing officers relied on a standardized form, MG 105, to establish clear physical boundaries within requisitioned homes, ensuring a strict separation between military personnel and female residents. Military regulations mandated that in homes shared by American soldiers and German families, women's sleeping areas had to be physically separated by at least one room from soldiers' quarters, with locks provided for the women's bedrooms to ensure their safety and privacy. In Heidelberg, 19-year-old Greta Schultz recorded her bewilderment in a diary later discovered by historians in 1978. "I hid in the cellar, expecting screams of terror from upstairs. Hours passed in silence. Finally, Mother called me up. 2 American soldiers were sitting at our kitchen table, quietly eating their own rations. They nodded politely and then went to sleep in Father's study. I keep waiting for something terrible to happen, but they barely even look at us." American occupiers maintained a rigid physical and emotional distance, governed by formalized rules and procedures. Military records indicate that 93% of requisition homes had door signs clearly marking private German quarters, particularly those occupied by women, as off-limits to military personnel. German women were required to sign acknowledgement forms confirming that American soldiers had adhered to proper conduct, creating a system of accountability that reinforced disciplined behavior. With only 8% of American occupation forces speaking even basic German, all interactions with civilians required the presence of official translators, transforming even the simplest conversations into formal, documented exchanges. This procedural requirement further prevented casual fraternization. Soldiers were issued 26,000 English-German phrase cards containing strictly professional language for necessary interactions. In Regensburg, where Nazi officials had established a comfort facility housing 24 conscripted women, American counterintelligence officers arrived and immediately sealed the building, posting guards to prevent entry by either soldiers or German civilians. Military police records show that these women, initially detained for questioning, were quickly released to their families or provided safe housing with elderly German couples, their status officially documented as civilian refugees to protect their privacy and dignity. Helga Weber, a designated comfort girl in Augsburg, later testified to International Red Cross investigators. "We were gathered in the gymnasium, trembling with fear, when the American soldiers entered. But instead of the horrors we expected, They brought female medical personnel who spoke to us privately, offering reassurance. Then they arranged transport to send us home. An American officer, through a translator, explained that we were free to go. I didn't understand. It was the complete opposite of everything we had been told would happen. Military police reports from the first month of occupation documented 57 violations of non-fraternization policies across the American zone, resulting in 41 courts-martial. These cases were prominently featured on the front page of Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper, emphasizing the command's zero-tolerance approach to misconduct. In stark contrast, contemporary estimates suggest that in the Soviet occupation zone in eastern Germany, over 240,000 German women suffered sexual violence during a comparable period, operating under entirely different protocols. As weeks passed, the initial terror felt by German women gradually gave way to confusion, then a cautious reevaluation of their assumptions. The Nazi propaganda machine's final campaign was unraveling, not through counterpropaganda but through the consistent, daily actions of American soldiers that systematically contradicted everything the women had been led to expect. May 1945, Heidelberg, Baden-Württemberg, in a modest office. The crisp white pages of Directive JCS1067 lay spread out on the desk of Colonel Robert Murphy, who oversaw its rigorous implementation across the American occupation zone. He explained to newly arrived officers, "This document defines our interactions with German civilians down to the precise meter of distance you must maintain during conversations." These regulations governed every facet of American-German civilian contact with mechanical precision: housing arrangements, separate bathroom facilities, food distribution protocols, medical services, and personal interactions. Soldiers were strictly prohibited from giving food directly to German civilians. Instead, supplies were funneled through German civil authorities. Medical care was provided through parallel facilities, with separate treatment centers for military personnel and civilians. When a German woman required specialized American medical expertise, strict protocols mandated the presence of a German medical professional and a neutral observer to ensure propriety. Every interaction lasting longer than 5 minutes required the completion of Form MG 308, a civilian interaction record that documented the purpose, duration, and witnesses of the conversation, creating a robust system of accountability. Military government archives contain an astonishing 217,430 such forms from 1945 alone, a testament to the bureaucratic thoroughness of the non-fraternization policy. In Nuremberg, a young woman named Elsa Schmidt recorded her observations in her journal. "The Americans have established a system where we barely see them. Food is distributed through our own officials. When they must enter our homes for inspections, they send teams accompanied by a female translator. Their distant, polite correctness is so strange. It's nothing like what we were told to expect." By August 1945, this structured formality had settled into predictable daily patterns across the occupied zone. The Joint Chiefs of Staff issued a modified Directive, JCS 1067/6, which slightly relaxed non-fraternization policies, permitting limited conversation in public places while maintaining strict prohibitions against entering German homes for non-official purposes. This carefully calibrated adjustment preserved essential protections while acknowledging that complete separation could be counterproductive in fostering long-term stability. The elaborate system of regulated interactions systematically dismantled the Reich's final propaganda narrative. German women, who had been conditioned to expect systematic violation, instead encountered a meticulously designed framework of protective mechanisms. The profound psychological impact of this stark contrast between expectation and reality prompted a deep reassessment, not only of American intentions but of the entire Nazi worldview they had been indoctrinated to accept. October 1945, Stuttgart, American occupation zone. Margaret Weber sat at a worn wooden desk in the military government office, diligently translating documents for her American employer, a task that would have been unthinkable just 6 months earlier. "I spent the first weeks waiting for the mask to drop," she later wrote in a poignant letter preserved in the Baden-Württemberg State Archives. "Each day of respectful treatment chipped away at another piece of Nazi propaganda. By autumn, I found myself questioning not just what I'd been told about the Americans, but every claim the Reich had ever made." Dr. Anna Merkel, a psychiatrist working with the military government, conducted a detailed study in 1947, interviewing 214 women who had been designated as comfort personnel. Her clinical observations revealed a consistent pattern: initial terror, followed by profound confusion when the expected violations never materialized, and finally, a systematic questioning of other Nazi ideological tenets, including racial theories and leadership principles.